Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I waited a little bit to see if we were going to be awake, but thank you, Eddie, for bailing me out. I appreciate it. Welcome to the panel on the state of LGBTQ plus youth in Oregon. We're all very excited that you're here. Before we get started, I want to introduce the panel, or rather have panelists introduce themselves. My name is Bowman. I'm a Tigard-Tualatin school board member, and I also work as a legislative affairs specialist for the Confederation of Oregon School Administrators, representing about 2,500 principals, superintendents, and central office administrators. Although today I'm speaking on behalf of myself and neither the school board or my employer. We'll go down the line from there.
Hi everybody, thank you for coming. This means a lot. My name is Daniel. I am a Rosebud Sioux member out of South Dakota, and I'm from Brookings Harbor. I graduated from Brookings Harbor High School, which is down on the southern coast. And currently I'm a junior at the University of Oregon and president of the Oregon College Democrats.
Hi, my name is Paula Nolan. I am a school principal and a district kind of administrator in the Eugene School District over alternative education, although I am speaking for myself here today and not my employer, but thank you for being here. It's a lot. Thank you.
Howdy y'all, my name is Lindsay Rae. I am a high school math teacher in Beaverton, Oregon at Westview High School. And I also serve as the regional vice president for the Oregon Education Association. But I guess I should also say I'm speaking for myself, not my affiliations.
Hi, I'm JJ. I'm a senior at Urban High School where I serve as the student body president there. I also work with Providence Healthcare on mental health awareness, and I'm speaking for myself as well.
So I think Daniel's the only one who didn't give the caveat, so he's speaking for whoever you want him to be speaking for when he speaks. Before we jump in, I do want to say a big thank you to the DPO staff for asking us to put together this panel. Casey Hansen, Mario Parker Milligan reached out, but I also want to give a very special plug to our DPO vice chair and who was chair of the Stonewall Caucus while I was vice chair, Michelle Risher. Please give it up for Michelle. We will be talking later in the afternoon about some policy solutions, and Michelle has been a tremendous fighter for some legislation at the state level that would protect and support LGBTQ plus youth. So thank you for being here, Michelle. I appreciate it. So first, the not fun, the more difficult part. I wanted to start this afternoon's panel by kind of giving a rundown of by the numbers, the state of LGBTQ plus youth in Oregon. And it's a little challenging to hear. I mean, even just reviewing these numbers, which I already knew intellectually, was kind of makes you pause a little bit. So I'm going to read through them, and then we're going to get to the fun part, which is going to be hearing the experiences and ideas of the panelists. So first, this data is from the Oregon Healthy Teens Survey, which is a state of Oregon sponsored survey that's representative of the student population. This is from 2017. The 2019 survey has not yet been released, and it happens every 2 years. So 18% of 8th and 11th graders in Oregon identified as something other than straight. So it could have been lesbian, gay, bisexual, not sure, or none of the above. And greater than 5% identified as transgender, non-binary, or gender non-conforming. So that's the population we're talking about. And then I want to pull out a few things from, I'll give a plug for another board that I used to serve on, that Lindsay still serves on, the Oregon Safe Schools and Communities Coalition. They do data collection and do an annual report that takes some of the Healthy Teens survey. And here's some of the findings from 2017. LGBT youth in Oregon are 2 times as likely to experience bullying and harassment at school. They're twice as likely to be threatened by a weapon. They're 3 times more likely to stay home from school for fear of safety, and significantly more likely than their peers to be chronically absent. They're also 2 to 3 times as likely as their peers, more likely than their peers to have been sexually assaulted. Half of all LGBTQ plus youth in Oregon have expressed that they've considered suicide. And a quarter of them have expressed that they attempted suicide. So that's sort of the basis that we're starting from. There's also another measure that the Oregon Public Health Division puts together. It's called the Positive Youth Development Framework, and I'm going to quote from it so I don't get this wrong. It's a holistic view of the physical, psychological, and social supports for healthy youth development. It's strongly associated with behaviors that promote physical and emotional health, as well as academic achievement. And so here's the state there. Straight/cisgender students have 6 out of 10 PYD indicator, which is considered strong. Lesbian, gay, bisexual students, 3 out of 10. Transgender students, 2 out of 10. So that's the not fun part. A couple other not super fun parts that I wanted to highlight for you that you might remember from reading in the news. In 2013, there was a sophomore in LaGrande, Oregon, who committed suicide, who was openly gay, and whose father said after he committed suicide that it was because he was incessantly bullied at school and that he wasn't accepted in his community for being gay. And 2013 might sound like ancient history, but I don't know if you saw the article about what happened in North Bend, Oregon, about there was 2 LGBT students who were being, again, bullied insanely by their peers, but also by the adults in their school, including school resource officers and administrators, who told them that they were going to hell and it was against their religion, and for punishment, when they were in trouble, they were forced to recite passages of the Bible. So that's happening in Oregon. That's not happening in Mississippi or in the South or in other parts of the country. That's happening here. And why I'm excited about this panel is because I think we in Oregon are proud to be trailblazers. We're proud to lead the country. We did marriage equality first. We did housing protections and labor protections for LGBT people first. We passed conversion therapy in one of the first states in the country. But we have a lot of work to do when it comes to protecting our kids. And I think it's fantastic that the Democratic Party wants to have this conversation at the Oregon Summit. So with that, I want to get to some personal stories and some personal background. So we heard from our panelists in the introduction phase. But what I think is interesting, particularly about the 2 college student and high school student, JJ and Daniel, is that they're not from the metro area. Daniel's from Brookings Harbor. Brookings Harbor is the school district. But Brookings is on the southern Oregon coast, very rural place, very conservative place. And JJ, you go to Redmond High School, so another conservative place. So my first question is to both of you, being out now, what is it like being in a rural place? And if you came out in that space, what was that experience like?
So last year I decided to come out to my high school, and I did that by bringing a boy to one of our school dances. And no one talked to me, but everyone looked at me. So, it was kind of an awkward situation, but it was also, I could focus on something totally different, except for the eyes that were looking at me the whole time. After a week went by, I ran for ASB president, and while I was doing that, no one was running against me, but then right after I came out, 2 people also put their name on the ballot because they felt like they could have won knowing that I just came out. Then they didn't meet the regulations of the ballot, so then I ran unopposed again. But then everyone was super supportive. People had something to say, they just didn't really say it. And teachers were supportive when they found out and when they knew. And then I led for me playing a team sport, and that's kind of where things went south, was when I was playing a team sport and all the boys on the team were using harsh language and towards the LGBTQ plus community, and then coaches not doing anything about it. And so, I decided to quit the team, which in my way was the right thing to do, while also talking to my school admin and talking to the boys who do play on that soccer team now. Things have not changed.
So I'm a junior in college now, so high school was about 3 years ago, and I came out the day before high school graduation because I was like, let me never have to see these people again. Peace out. And so it was a good liberating opportunity for me to have a big step of graduating and also coming out. But I didn't come out really to my family. I just kind of like admitted it to myself at that point. I didn't come out to my family until Thanksgiving break of freshman year of college, which is kind of like the whole thing. You go to college and you become gay. So that was kind of my experience with it, but being in the closet in rural America had a lot of different adverse effects. Speaking on behalf of like moving on and going to colleges, I was looking at colleges like super far away, trying to, if anyone has seen the movie Love, Simon, they depict it really perfectly with like you wanting to go to this liberal university where there's rainbows everywhere and everyone's gay and it can be super open. And that's kind of the idea you get when you're in rural America and you're looking for colleges, is that the farther away you go, the more accepting it'll be. You don't have to deal with any of your past, blah, blah, blah. You don't have to talk to these people ever again. And then it had other adverse like emotional effects because it was kind of just known. You're a little bit different than everyone else. You don't totally click with all the other guys at the high school. And so there were obviously like the small little bullying aspects that would happen all the time. And just the constant questioning of my sexuality that was posed in a negative light. It was never like, oh my gosh, you're gay, let's be best friends. It was like, oh, are you the word? And that question just has the negative connotation and doesn't make a welcoming environment for students to come out. And then additionally, there's really no one out, and so you have no one really to look to. For me, I just saw some reporter tweeted and was asking like, what was your first person you knew that was influential and gay? And mine was the Olympic swimmer diver.
Oh. No.
Tom Daly. Tom Daly's coming out video on YouTube I watched like 1,000 times in my room. And that was the only person I really knew or looked up to where I was like, he looks like me, he has the same ambitions of being an Olympian, blah, blah, blah. And that was the first person I really like knew coming out gay. There was no one close to me, no one in my family. And so it's really isolated and lonely, and that's rural America. And then put on top of that being different than everyone in rural America, you feel even more isolated and lonely.
Very well said. Which reminds me, the first gay parent I ever met was Representative Rob Nose when I started working in the legislature not that long ago. Which is kind of crazy to think about, right? Like I was, 22 years old before I met someone who was a gay dad. So well said. Paula, I want to ask you. You had I don't even think we can call it a coming out experience because of the way that it happened, and I recognize that it's a difficult thing to talk about given the circumstances, but I think it would be really valuable as a principal in Redmond. What was your experience like when it all went down?
Sure. So I was actually JJ's principal a few years ago, and I was doing my thing, Mr. Nolan, going to work, and was in the closet as a transgender woman. And I had planned on being in the closet for many years. I was a later in life realizer. And a small town, it's very hot gossip. If the high school principal is transgender, and I learned, because it was a small community, that one of my medical providers had leaked my information. And and so I was able to track that back and figure out where it happened. And very quickly, I learned that the rumor had been going around the community, was strengthened by this leaked information. There were a lot of people asking questions. There were administrators from the Willamette Valley calling and asking questions, so unbeknownst to me. But once that information was leaked, things got really, really rough for me. And the best decision that I could make for my family was to leave my position and move. And so I left Redmond and I moved to Eugene and was a stay-at-home mom for a year, and now I am back as a school principal and a kind of a district administrator over our alternative programs in the district. So my story is a little bit different, but I was an adult in a position of privilege, and where I had access to people and resources, and I still had to make that decision. It was still very difficult, and I think about youth who are in our schools and how they don't have they don't have the same level of privilege that I had at the time, and they're there. Like they don't always get the choice to move and leave, and so I think it's really important for all of us to take up the charge of doing whatever we can to protect these young people, so that they have a positive experience in school, so that they can move on and do great things in their lives. The statistics are scary, but we, all of us, educators, activists, other folks involved in it, and what everybody does here, have a piece to play, have a role to play in helping these young people. So I'm excited for today, and thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, Paula. And one thing I think about with your story and with a lot of other stories coming out in smaller, more rural, more conservative communities is imagine being a trans student in the closet at Redmond High School and watching your principal experience that. What message are we sending? So I think that's an important piece of this too. Lindsay, I want to turn to you as our resident expert on all things GSA, working with a lot of openly LGBTQ plus students. What do you think are the greatest challenges facing those students in school, whether it be with their peers, academically, but what do you think, how would you talk about the state of LGBTQ plus youth in schools?
So I think the first thing that comes to mind is lack of representation among educators, because I think people are afraid to be out. I teach at a huge high school. There are 127 teachers and 30 some odd education support professionals. So it's 160 people, and I'm the only out person at that school. I know there are other people, I know, but I'm the only one who will talk about it with my kids, and I think of my own experience as a kid and not seeing, I think we're kind of echoing that, like not seeing that person be successful, not seeing that person exist. And so I think for a lot of our youth, just kind of being in this vacuum of representation and seeing like, okay, so I'm feeling all these things, this feels really weird, like nobody else seems to be doing that, and not seeing any adults affirm that can be really, really difficult. I think the other big thing, two other things. Home life is very difficult for a lot of our students. They're not out at home, they're afraid to be out at home. I've had, in my 7 years teaching at Westview, I've had 4 individual students come up to me and ask me for resources about homeless youth because they know that they're going to be asked to leave their houses when they come out. And that definitely impacts how you perform at school, right? If you don't feel safe at home, and then you come to school and you don't see people that look like you, and maybe you don't feel super safe at school, you're not gonna be thriving academically. That's not gonna be the top of your priority list. And then the final thing, I think you spoke to these earlier, Ben, with the statistics about bullying and such. My school is pretty okay, I think, as far as bullying goes. That shouldn't be okay, like pretty okay. Like, you know, I don't hear like slurs thrown around the hallway all that often. I hear them, but not all that often. And I know in high schools across Oregon, in middle schools across Oregon, and even more, it's seeping down to elementary schools across Oregon, where people, these kids are hearing things, and they're throwing that back at our students who identify as LGBTQ. And I think that when you don't feel safe at school, you aren't going to be like, golly, I really hope I do awesome on this math test. You're going to be, golly, I hope I get out of here with nobody noticing me today, which is a very hard thing to do at school. So.
That's amazing. Not a single other out educator. I mean, Beaverton, right? No, we're not talking about a rural place. We're talking about metro area. So that I kind of want to ask our other panelists on this. What have your experiences been like in terms of representation at school? Were there other out members of the faculty, or also like curriculum? Did you ever see prominent gay figures in the curriculum from an educator perspective and from a student perspective?
So I went to elementary school on a reservation in Northern California, and had really, the sexuality was really not an aspect of my K through 5th grade. But I had come to find out after I had found out my principal from elementary school had passed away, that he was gay. So there was some representation, but I had no idea. In high school, I know there was a teacher who was gay. I'm not sure if he was out or not. He's now married, but I do remember before he left, he told like the staff and faculty that he can't really teach in rural America until he finds more things, because he was single, alone, there's really no one else in rural America, and so he left, but I remember him giving me his contact information, saying, if you ever need anything, just let me know, and kind of just, it's like code, you know what you're talking about, and that was kind of that. I honestly could not tell you, learning about Stonewall or anything of that was on my own doing in college, not even a part of a curriculum within college. Obviously there is some curriculum, but That's all elective and based on whether or not you want to take that, but K through 12, I could not tell you one time I think we did anything of the sort.
Yeah, I'm just going to echo your view and recollection of the curriculum that you've seen. I haven't seen K-12 explicit, teaching lessons around LGBTQ history. As far as other out faculty members, I've taught with a few other folks who are out in my career. As far as transgender staff members, not that I'm aware of. And as far as school site administrators, I've looked for them. We don't all hit the news, but I found like 2 others in the country that are currently openly serving. So, and I haven't found any other transgender school administrators at the school level in our state. So, not a lot of representation as far as I know from a faculty perspective.
Currently at my school, there's no openly out educators, but I would say that many teachers, many staff members are very open and accepting to many students.
So I want to talk a little bit about coming out and what that's like for students. And so, Lindsay, I think I want to ask you as a GSA advisor, if you had a student who came to you in confidence and said, I'm gay, or I'm trans, or I'm a member of the community, but I'm not out yet, but I want to come out, how would you counsel them? What are the things that a student has to think about when they're going to make that decision publicly? And then if any other folks want to weigh in on that too.
Good question. This has happened to me, so I know how to answer it. I would say I think it's different for each student, and I try to be really real with my kids and let them know it's not going to be all rainbows and puppy dogs when you come out. We talk a lot about family because I know that's who they struggle with that all the time. And my GSA group, they'll talk to each other about okay, I'm thinking about telling my uncle this weekend, so let's brainstorm things to say. And they talk about, they use a lot of euphemisms and be like, I think maybe I might be it's just I could be maybe thinking about I'm just okay, I've already lost you. I need to I know you're nervous, but I want you to own it. I want you to be sure of yourself, be confident, because that confidence will come across. I definitely counsel them to be safe first, and to know that when they come out, there is probably, I don't know about your situation, Judy, but there will probably be people that will take notice in a really negative way. And so I really want to make sure that they are ready for that they know what to expect. And then also to identify their support group. Make sure you know who your people are. I can be one of those people for you, your teacher who's if you ever need anything, I got you. And I think if you have that super strong support group, and then kind of slowly figuring out when is the right time to come out, how you want to come out, all of that will kind of just happen.
Other thoughts on that? What did you have to think about?
I came out to my family my freshman year of high school, so I didn't come out to school till junior year. But when I came out to my parents, the first thing my dad said to me was, "Oh, I thought you were gonna say you got someone pregnant." And then, my mom took it very hard. And so, through my freshman through till I came out my junior year, I saw either my school's gonna take it how my mom did, or my school's gonna take it how my dad did. And then I also saw myself in the middle. I saw myself as being in leadership, having personal connections with almost every single teacher at my school, knowing the community super well, having my name in the newspaper, things that people know me as this one person, but yet since I haven't told them this one thing, that it could all come crumbling down. And that was just because I think if they acted like how my mom reacted, that's what would happen. If they acted like how my dad reacted, then I think I would have flourished. And I just didn't want to take that 50-50 chance on what would happen. And then one day I was sitting in my room and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna do it. Not because I'm scared of what reaction is gonna happen, but I need to do it for myself. And with whatever happens, I know that I know I can go through it because I'm a strong gay male, and I know that whatever happens, it's gonna be good. And then I came out, and I kind of stuck and did my own thing. I talked to the people who were encouraging and who were accepting, and I kind of just decided not to let the other views get in my way.
So I think this is really telling of my personality, but when I was going through that process, I thought it was all really stupid and unnecessary, just because no one has ever said, oh, I'm straight, and had any sort of adverse reaction. And so I thought it was really stupid and dumb, and I wasn't going to do any of it because why do we have to do that? But as I'm growing older, I'm realizing it's more about a visibility type thing. I think there's still a line drawn between like having to come out and just like existing in that visibility. So there's that. But for me, a large part in coming out in right before high school graduation was that was me accepting that this is the case, that I can wear the clothes that I think look nice and not the ones that I think make me look straight. That I can go to U of O and meet these people and not have to come out to them because they're just going to know me as gay. So that was kind of what I was dealing with, was more or less finding the why. Why do I have to come out? Why do you have to make a Facebook post? Why do you have to do any of this? This is all just unnecessary. But as I'm growing older and learning more about politics and LGBT visibility and rights, it's really important that we have these experiences for the people younger than us. It's the whole story of you're not pulling up the ladder behind you as you climb, you're allowing people to come up with you. And that's really important to me, coming from rural America and a working class tribal family. And that ladder can't come up, otherwise I can't get up. And I know other people are like me, and so I need them to come up with me because otherwise I'm gonna be up there all alone.
Really well said. And I kind of want to follow up on that a little bit, because this is something I've been thinking about and quite frankly struggling with. Is what is the responsibility of someone who's out to be out publicly and declare that? So I think the evolution of this roughly is like Harvey Milk as an activist was all about coming out of the closet. He said you must come out of the closet. You have an obligation to come out of the closet. And that's borne out. I read this a few years ago. One of the greatest predictors of if a voter was going to support gay marriage was whether or not they knew someone who was openly gay. Which is really strong and compelling evidence for why we sort of do have an obligation to come out and share our identity. But I love that you mentioned Love, Simon. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. But I think to me, Love, Simon sort of culturally signaled a shift in how we think about coming out. We very much don't talk about coming out as an obligation anymore, especially for young people. We talk about it as when you're ready, when the moment's right, when you're safe. Whereas that was not Harvey Milk's approach. It was very much like we're in a fight, and we've all got to be engaging in it. So I'm curious, and I will say frankly, when I ran for school board in a contested election in a white suburban community, I never would lie or not tell someone if they asked, but I definitely wasn't like on my mail pieces that Republican voters were going to get. It didn't say like openly gay man, which I don't know. I struggle with, should I have led with that? Should I be leading with that more frequently? And I'm curious, all of you are in public positions in one way or another, leadership positions. How do you think about how forward you should be with your identity? Do you have the privilege of, like Daniel mentioned, like I had mentioned, sort of not leading with it when it's convenient? How do you approach it? You kind of touched on it, so.
Well, after what had happened to me when I was pulled out of the closet, my goal had been to just be stealth. So that means you're not out, you're just going to try to blend in. But then I started seeing younger people again. I was a stay-at-home parent, but I saw young transgender children, and I was like, I need to be out. I need to be visible as someone who is just living their life, because there aren't, I didn't see a lot of other examples around me. And so you mentioned what was the impact on the student? I'm trying to have that impact on the people that are around me. So both within my school with young people, the statistics are scary, but trying to show you can have a happy life, you can live through, but also just in the community. I'm active elsewhere and open elsewhere, and I've had so many people that have said, oh, you're just like a person. I tell them, I'm like, my goal was to just go to Albertsons and shop and just like do my thing. And they're like, yeah, that's what people want. People want to be happy. And so, but I do want to say that I have privilege that allows me to do that. Transgender women of color and queer people of color are at much greater risk than I am to be out, just because of the privilege that I carry with me wherever I go with my skin. I have access to resources. I don't live in an unsafe area. So although I'm saying, yeah, I'm out and I'm visible, it's because I'm able to do that. And there are some times when I am in places that are probably not as safe, where, you know, I might take off the rainbow wristband. And that's a huge privilege to have, because I know not everybody has it. So I think that it's a personal decision, and it's one that I think if you're able to do it and you feel comfortable doing that, because once you come out, it's out, right? You are out, and that piece doesn't come back. If you're comfortable and able to do it, then more power to you. But if not, then more power to that person as well.
I think I would agree. I would emphasize safety, but I personally, for me, it was like, oh my god, like I have to be out because of my own experience as a young confused child in high school who didn't see anything like that and was just like, I guess I just really like my best friend. Like I really think, and I totally agree that we have privilege because of the skin that I'm in, and occasionally I can pass for a straight person, but I think in my professional capacity, like, I will try to mention it as often as possible. Just be like, oh my gosh, my wife said this, and they're just like, cool, has your wife done this? And I'm like, look at you, you're teenagers, you're so okay with this, and it just doesn't, I really like to normalize it, I guess. One of my favorite things on Coming Out Day, which was last week, I had a few friends come out, even though for all intents and purposes they are in a heterosexual relationship. They're a cis woman married to a cis man, and they'll come out and be like, actually, I'm pan. I just happen to fall for this dude. Like, I'm just like, good for you. Thank you for making us more visible. Also on Coming Out Day, I really like to encourage straight people to come out as straight. I'm like, hey, like, how about you? Like, I'm part of the LGBTQ community. And you? And they'd be like, no. I'm like, awesome. Glad we know that about each other. So I just think just normalizing that and just making it just part of social interaction, I think is really important for our youth. So.
Personally, I like to tell people that I'm out just because, as Ben referred at the beginning, that there's LGBTQ has a higher chance of suicide, either attempts or completion, and I just like to be out for the kids who couldn't be able to.
So before we transition to policy, one thing I am curious about from folks who are in schools or have recently been in schools is, to what extent is this an adult problem versus a student problem? And what I mean by that is, are adults making the environment unsafe for LGBT kids because of, lack of visibility, lack of understanding, lack of policy, lack of rules, or is it there's actually homophobic students that are part of the problem? How do you think about where the source of the problem is?
This is a tough question because I don't think blame anywhere is totally correct. I think we're all a little bit at fault. However, I think with some of the people in my professional experiences that I've worked with, there's a generational kind of, I guess, like, feeling on this whole thing. So I've met a lot of, like, older gay successful people who are really jealous of me being able to be out right now. They didn't get to have this experience. There's movies online you can watch of how gay people had to act in cities and how secretive they had to be of such things, and how they've had entire families and they've had to completely change that now because it's acceptable. So I don't necessarily know. I think for all intents and purposes of this being Oregon and the education system, I think we can all do a better job. But I think the fault of homophobia is put more onto our culture and who we are electing and who, how we are electing, I guess is another good way to put that. I think we're obviously in some dark areas right now where it's not helping anybody, especially with our vice president and his policies on LGBT, all of it. So I don't know if I would say teachers or students are to blame. I think everyone could do a little bit more.
I'm going to pass it down to JJ. I'll loop back if there's anything to add. I want to make sure. Okay. You want that? Yeah. Just put it on the spot.
I think both students and educators are really good at looking at labels, and students finding themselves like a label or a group that they fit into, and then educators trying to find a way to make that group feel included. And I think that's what a lot of school districts and a lot of schools do, is trying to find a minority group to feel included with the rest of the student body. And I think right there's the problem, because you're already labeling a group of people as a minority, you're already labeling them as something, so you're making them feel different, and then also ourselves labeling ourselves and kind of making us feel different or set aside to the rest of the student body. So I think just one thing we really need to focus on is dropping the labels and realizing that everyone in a school building is a person, and kind of treat everyone with the same respect. So kind of set guidelines, not to how to include people, but just how to act as a human.
I think that, I'll just speak from the adult perspective, I think that we have a lot of responsibility to do what we can to create an environment that is not just inclusive, but warm and welcoming for all students. And that means, we have to make sure that folks that may not have background have, I'm not trying to touch on policy, I won't, but that they actually have background, this is what LGBTQ means, this is what transgender means, because that way when we say a transgender student can use whatever restroom they want that they identify with, they understand what that means. I mean, it's amazing what you hear when you are perceived as cis, like before I came out, and perceptions and what people believe. And so it's what can we do as adults in a school system to try to make things easier and more welcoming for students? So, for example, not all districts have a policy. They might have adopted the Oregon School Boards Association's policy around non-discrimination, which can fit LGBTQ students within it, but they may not have an actual plan for how do we do restrooms, how do we do field trips, how do we, overnight field trips, how do we do all this stuff? And so you have islands of equity kind of throughout the state with different districts, but not everybody has that. And so you have, all of a sudden you have this big deal that you have to try to figure out when you could have already had things in place. There are schools that don't have an identified gender-neutral restroom for young people to use, and then all of a sudden a transgender student comes through and it's where are they going to go to the bathroom? Well, it should just be, it's right over there, if you want to use it, because you can use it, you can go wherever you want. And so I think that, just to close all that, we have responsibilities as school leaders and as a community, as a state, to empower people with the ability and also to require them to have these things in place for young people. So you're not having to create a wheel because someone came along or decides to come out.
I would just add, I think the adults bear a lot of responsibility because kids follow what adults do. We have somebody in the White House right now who is awful. And there are a lot of kids emulating that person. And in my opinion, I think strides forward in equity have taken so many steps back because of the way that people perceive that they can act and get away with it. And I see that in students all the time. So I just think we need to be examples of how to treat people well.
Actually, I want to echo real fast. So this will also help launch into policy and to echo off of you. So when I was a junior in high school, one of my close friends came out as transgender. and they were stopping using the girls' bathroom and started using the boys' bathroom. And this caused an entire ruckus in the community. This was around the Trump era, like the beginning of it, and so I remember then the next day flags on big pickup trucks came out with big Trump flags, and they put stickers places, and they would, this was social media time still, I'm not old by any means, but there was a lot of like bullying online with this. And I remember going to our principal at the time, and I was like, we need to do something, like, why are you being silent? And I remember her telling me that, like, we can't adhere to the minority, there's too much majority, and that was shocking to me, and I was so frustrated. But that's an example of our administrators could do more in that sense. This last summer, before school had started, I was back home and my teachers invited me to a constitutional law and education seminar that Oregon required these schools to do with their teachers. And not only was everyone dreading it, when I get there, they're like, oh, why would you come? This is such a waste of time. Which was like, oh, okay, not great. But it was an entire waste of time. Even I was sitting there like, why did we sit through this? This was the most generic thing I've ever been to. And we had faced inequity within our schools, and those were not examples. The examples were so baseline, and everyone knows this. This is a baseline thing. Let's get into the nitty-gritty. And so I think on the legislative level, we need to do more to practice equity within our schools and stop being so baseline. This is the general consensus of equity, because every school is different. Portland, Roosevelt High School is going to face a different sort of equity problems than Brookings Harbor is going to face. There's different communities living here, and Oregon needs to recognize that literally only maybe one other city is going to be reflective of the Portland metro area, where a lot of our legislation comes from. And if we're going to be helpful to our LGBT youth, we need to get rid of that mindset for our schools immediately.
We will follow Paula and Daniel's transition to policy. And as a policy nerd, I'm excited about this. So in 2009, Oregon passed the Safe Schools Act, which some of you might be familiar with. Basically what it did is it required school districts to adopt policies that would protect their students, including LGBTQ plus students. Originally, there was like very little compliance with the bill when it was passed, but the Safe Schools and Communities Coalition did their annual report, and the first few years of their report was literally ranking schools as or districts as either gold, silver, or bronze. Gold if you adopted it, silver if you had adopted it but not all of it, and then bronze if you hadn't adopted it yet. And so after a few years of running that report, districts were basically the public declaration of you're not in compliance shifted everyone into compliance. Which was seen as a really big victory, and we should give credit to Basic Rights Oregon for helping pass that. Here's the problem. I don't know if there's any evidence that school districts adopting those policies changed the lived experiences of the out students in those districts. So I think one thing I spend a lot of time thinking of, which is frustrating because I think it's so challenging, is what do we do? We talked about the statistics at the beginning of our panel. There's clearly a really severe problem. If requiring districts to adopt policies isn't actually changing things for kids, what can change the experiences that students are living? And particularly using a policy framework, how would you approach it? What are some of the steps you would take? It's a big question. Anyone want to lead off? Okay, I'll give you we'll prime the conversation with some of the recommendations from the Safe Schools and Communities report. They talk about having trained and supportive educators is one step. So that's anything from like a pre-service training at teachers preparation programs to have teachers who are more responsive to the needs of those student populations. Trauma-informed classrooms and using a trauma lens when you're serving students. As you can imagine, students who are living these experiences are experiencing trauma. Inclusive curriculum, this is one that I'm really excited about and working on in Tigard-Tualatin School District, is making sure that our curriculum includes prominent LGBT people throughout history who've done great things, who are currently excluded from almost all curriculum. So those are a few, and then we could talk about the bill that Michelle has worked on with me on data collection later, but I do want to hear, from the educators and students, what do you think?
So, okay, thank you for clarifying. I think that a big part of it is in teacher preparation, but also administrator preparation. There are so many different pathways to get your license in this state, and each school of education is different. Like if you look at the U of O Teach program at the U of O, they are very inclusive, and they are actively trying to teach their student teachers how to be inclusive towards the LGBTQ community, along with many other communities. But again, there are lots of different pathways. So I think that we need to look at how TSPC, Teacher Standards Practice Commission, can help to influence what is actually being taught, both at teacher and administrative preparation programs, or for folks, even for the online programs as they apply for licenses. I think that policy is important, but I really would like to see, Oregon is a local control state, so I'm sorry if I'm being pedantic, I'm not trying to be, but each district is kind of, in a lot of different ways, able to kind of do it at once within the framework of the state school board. But there's a lot of freedom there. And so a policy might be passed, but the administrative rules to actually make that happen may not actually be that well developed. It may just say lies in the superintendent or their designee. Well, what does that look like if a student who's trans wants to go on an overnight field trip, or a queer student wants to go on an overnight field trip, or play on a team, or access a locker room? So I think that there's a place for legislation to require districts to actually have a plan for LGBTQ students. And there are a few districts that have model policies that could be used. So I think it's the preparation, it's not just policy, but the administrative rules. And basically, a district should be able to say, here is the rule, here are the rules, here are the plans, here's what we're going to do. And I think it would be, there's a set of criteria that could be developed, we won't go into it right now, that a district could show, yes, this is part of what we do here. And a big heavy lift for that would be the Division 22 OIRs. Schools and districts have to sign off that they have it.
I would think, I would echo the need for training, and I think in a lot of districts you have training of professional development offered to staff that is, here are your choices that you can go to. Hey, do you want to learn about LGBTQ youth? Cool, you can go to that workshop, or you can go over here and learn about science standards. And I think the people who go to those workshops are not the people that need to go to those workshops. And because then you have this kind of coalition of the willing, and you're preaching to the choir, and it's all, rah, rah, this is so great, our kids are going to be so safe. And then you have 95% of your staff who've never been trained on what transgender even means, much less how to effectively educate those students. So I think policy around mandatory training for school districts, that hopefully is not one of those little computer things that you just have to put through, like the bloodborne pathogen. That's super fun. The other thing I would say, I know we have, there's been some health curriculum, some health standards that have been outlined by the Oregon Department of Education, and those are fantastic, they're brand new, and they start talking about gender in kindergarten. They start talking about sexual orientation, I think around 6th grade, if I recall. And Paula's right about local control for sure, and this is like the union brain in me is like, that's organize. Like you need to get your people out, you need to get your students out, because I have students who, when they're graduated and they realize that this is now what my school district is starting to do, they showed up at the school board and were like, this is so awesome, golly, we wish that we had this, our lives would have been so much richer. And then you also have a bunch of parents who are showing up and being like, this is awful, our children are gonna die. And it's having enough voice to make sure that your community is behind you and pushing for that kind of stuff. And then, the last thing, I don't know how realistic this is, I'm a math teacher, so I tend to start thinking about data. I would love to see some statistics. I know we have the school climate survey. I would love to see districts kind of have to report out on the health of their LGBTQ youth. And I know that gets dicey because then you have to depend on students to out themselves, but I think the students who are willing to be out and willing to talk about what's happening at schools, I think that would be really indicative of what districts are actually doing on the ground when it comes to their everyday lives.
Okay, so a few things. So how many of you have lived in rural Oregon? Okay, so my version of rural Oregon is 2 hours from a mall, but that mall has a Kohl's, not a J. Crew or a Nordstrom. So it's very different. When I was doing sports, it was at least a 2-hour drive to the next school that was of our size in order to play sports. So that was we'd take days off from school. So I think if anyone in the room or in the legislature or anywhere has this idea that we're going to create a policy where gay people are going to want to live in rural Oregon, I think that's overambitious and not the direction we're going for. So I think that so I think we need to focus more on exposure. So I was privileged in that a lot of my mother's family lived in the Bay Area, so I got to visit San Francisco all the time, and I got to see different kinds of people, but there are people from my hometown who have never really left my hometown. They're now taking logging jobs, and they just talk with the different loggers on the radio, and I go home and talk with them, and they're much different. They're really immersed into this culture of logging, and you guys all know the stereotype, it's pretty real. And so I think for me, speaking less on a policy level, because I don't totally know all these acronyms everyone's talking about, I think we should really focus more on exposure, of getting our students places and showing them what this world is like. There was nothing like that for me growing up, and a lot of it was just my family's privilege in having family in different places for us to visit. But then additionally, you're talking about this school climate survey. And I don't know if any of these surveys require student input, but I've never once taken a survey where they're like, what's your school like? So I don't know who's speaking on behalf of my district, who has the knowledge. In addition to that issue, when I was a freshman in high school, 17 of our 40 staffers left. And so when I started my sophomore year, it was like an entirely new district. Since then, I've had, I haven't been to the school, but since between now and when I started high school, we've had 3 different superintendents, a lot of different interim ones, so it's really not stable. And so for anyone to say, oh yeah, the superintendent can speak on behalf of the climate of the school, that's a lie. They've been there for maybe a year. They're not from this city. They don't understand these things. So I think being way more specific in who we're pulling our data from is going to be way more helpful in understanding what are these schools like, who is living here, because there are people who've lived there since they were born, and they're going to know what this is like way better than someone who just moved here from who knows where.
Well said. So after, I'm going to make a couple closing remarks, and then we're going to open it up to questions, so think of a good question for the panelists. First plug is on the policy front. My pitch to you is that you should run for office, particularly for school boards. There are so few openly LGBT school board members in Oregon. I went to the Oregon School Boards Association convention, and just by chance ran into someone who was also, I think she was wearing a rainbow pin, and I had made a comment in a different breakout room, and we sort of had this, oh my God moment, like there's another one, like we're together. So all that to say, if we believe that representation matters, it matters in classrooms, it matters for administrators, but also matters for policymakers. So you should consider running for office. And then I want to plug a couple groups who I think you brought up some great points, Daniel, that I want to highlight some people who are doing good work in that area. First, for the Oregon Healthy Teens Survey, which far from all students are participating in, but does provide great data for us. The Oregon Health Authority is doing great work right now trying to increase participation and trying to get those surveys into more schools, which I think will paint a clearer picture of what's happening in our state. So they're doing great work. And then another policy idea is, so you're all familiar, I'm sure, with the term achievement gap or opportunity gap, which is used to talk about the difference between white students and students of color in terms of academic performance data. And one of the things Oregon has done because of that persistent achievement gap in our state is we've created student success plans for student populations with targeted resources. So the Black African American Student Success Plan, we just passed last session, the first ever Latino Student Success Plan. Colt Gill, the Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction in Oregon, basically runs the Department of Education. He is proposing and trying to get through an LGBTQ plus student success plan, which I think is really important. Because as we saw from the data, the gaps exist, and whether they're academic gaps or social gaps or health gaps or whatever, the gaps exist. Kids aren't being served. So I think we need a comprehensive plan as a state with resources attached to serve those students. And I see as some hopeful potential future legislators that I'll be leaning on to help us get that through. So please join me in thanking our panelists for making the trip to Sun River to talk to us. Thank you all very much. And with, I think we got about 10 minutes left, I wanted to open it up to questions. And I see the party vice chair raising her hand, so she gets first bid.
Oh, I probably don't need the mic, loud as it is. I just want to say, as a point of reference for where we were, this is my third summer. 4 years ago, we had to fight Casey Hansen, who is now the chair. By the way, there are 8 officers of the DPO. 5 of us are queer. Woo! Okay. Second point, this is the first all queer panel we've ever had. This is the first person from the DPO who has ever been allowed to be moderator. So that is a big achievement. I'm really happy and I was proud of that. And Ben's work is you know, I love Ben. He is a hope, and y'all are a hope. Anybody notice what's missing in this room today? You see any electeds?
Yeah. City councilor.
City councilor. But no state legislators. And that goes to our point, your comment about we've been trying to get the bullying bill, which Ben was instrumental in with Margaret Dougherty, passed. We cannot get a hearing from our legislators. They will listen to basic rights. The anti-bullying bill costs nothing. I have written on behalf of the caucus 3 resolutions. The last 2 were based, one was a comprehensive transgender health care. The second one was on faith-based discrimination. And this last one was on the marginalization and attempted eradication of the transgender and intersex communities by the Trump. Both of those actually made it to and got passed successively the past 2 years. The DNC adopted them. We can't get any action, and we can't get our electeds to pay attention and listen to us, even when it costs them basically no money. I can tell you what I think y'all need to do. You need to raise help. You need to not be forgotten, because even though I'm the first and only transgender vice chair of a state Democratic Party and one in the line of succession, they didn't consult me, or in fact they kept me out of this whole deal. That's not right. It's not personally offensive. It bothers me. So this is a great start. What I would love to see is for y'all to pick this up and carry it and run with it. And as Ben knows, I'm not afraid to bite the hand that occasionally feeds me or throws me a fork from the table. And I have managed to bully my way onto the Democratic National Committee's LGBT Advisory Board by pissing off the chair. We got a great thing going. We got, when we started 2 years ago, part of my campaign thing as caucus chair was to bring the rural counties in. Now we have Cala, we have Bill Hertz, we have Lupe, are all from rural areas. And I really think this is a start. They're all activists, they're all wanting to work hard, and I think we need to pull together. And with y'all helping, anything I can do to aid you and promote it. I was the Teamsters rep for 4 years in Mobile, Alabama under the Reagan administration, so I know how to fight dirty. But thank you. But we need to get the anti-bullying passed, and we need to get our legislators. And thank you all, because y'all are the best panel I've ever seen.
Question?
Hi, my name is Brooke. I'm straight.
Thank you for doing that.
I am a former high school teacher and a military family advocate. And so much of what you're saying affects a very unique population of military children who are forced to move around to every state their service member parents are expected to serve in, and usually they're rural communities. And so they're constantly going through a transition every couple of years of trying to figure out how to play by the rules of the game where they live. So I'm very curious about what you think from a policy standpoint are the things that we can do that create a domino effect. So maybe we can't get this across the state. Maybe we can't enact something that improves the lives of children across the state, but what can we do in our individual school districts? What can we do in our individual neighborhood that will push the needle in Oregon, that will push the needle to every other state in this nation? So just give me 2 things.
That's a great question. Any panelists have thoughts on that?
So things that can be done in every community. I think that a PFLAG is incredibly powerful in a community where they are active and where they can organize. And I think that that's huge. To your point, school boards.
Can you explain PFLAG?
Yeah. What is the acronym?
Parents and friends of lesbian and gays.
Yeah. So maybe I'm missing a G on there, but
Is that a parent group, basically?
yeah. So it's a parent group, an allies group of queer individuals, and so you don't just have to be a parent of someone to be in it, but they provide a lot of the national organization provides a lot of resources and assistance in organizing, and even having that small community as a touch point for someone who moves in could be really huge for someone. It's a starting point instead of having to draw the map all by yourself, and so I think if we start to see more of those, I think that would help move the needle a little bit. And in the meantime, make it easier for people to just live their lives.
I would say GSAs in every school, get all the GSAs everywhere, which I know is really difficult in rural communities. If you can find a sponsor who is willing just to create a safe space, Ben was asking me what my deal is with GSAs, and I was like, well, I run one. I don't run one. I provide a safe space for one. My students run it. And I would say for that, GLSEN, GLSEN, which is the Gay and Lesbian School Education Network, something like that. They have so many resources about how to get a GSA started. They talk about how to get a GSA started in a community that maybe is not super cool with that. But the more GSAs you have, then those families that are moving around, there's always a place for that kid to go and be okay. So.
Okay. I'll also stay after for questions if anyone has any questions. But I would say inclusive language. So I see online, and to use your situation as an example, there's a lot of you'll see a cute video of a little boy loving on his mom, and it's like, oh, he's gonna treat his wife so good someday, and it's like, well, what if he doesn't want a wife? Things very simple like that. Stop asking your children about boyfriends or girlfriends in school. I have little nephews, and I've been very adamant on stop asking them if they have girlfriends. It's just not helpful to me to have to tell them once they understand that I'm going to have a husband, not a girlfriend, because they ask me that all the time. So things like that are helpful, and people like me who see that are drawn to that, and so you'll kind of this community will form.
One thing that comes to mind for me is using a social capital lens. So what I mean by that is, if you can't run for school board, particularly because you're moving a lot, as our city councilors will tell you too, school districts have a bajillion committees. You've got a facilities committee, you've got a budget committee, you've got a curriculum adoption committee, you've got a strategic plan committee, and they're always looking for people to serve on these committees. And regardless of what the committee is, if you're on the committee, you have social and political capital within the district by nature of being on the committee. So you will know the superintendent by their first name, you'll know the school board members by their first name, which gives you an entry point when something happens inevitably in one of these districts to be able to say, hey, what's going on? I want some answers on this, or what's our policy on this? And it's not a place of tremendous power, but you can influence the discussion, and you can make sure that things are being addressed in ways that is difficult if you're just a total outsider. So I look at committees as well.
So I have worked with youth for 25 years, but I am a construction manager, and I worked at the university for 3 years, and now I work for the city of Portland. And I really felt like the university did a lot of positive things. I think the city of Portland even does it better in some ways. And that being that they do require everyone to go to equity classes and a lot of different things like that. And just a word of encouragement, and this really comes back to networking is my question. I would think, is there some kind of a networking, that you said it, you need to see more people visible. How do we get that going? And I'd love to help in any way I can, because in the group I work with of about 35 construction professionals of the city, there's at least 6 LGBT, and they've all come out very well, and they're known to be, and they're required to be hired. And so they've done some of those, everyone's required to be considered. I know we say that, and you said that some of the schools adopt the policy, but they don't walk the walk. So I just want to encourage you to help us think of ways to get that out there by some kind of a networking thing. Just acknowledging the people that are out there that are doing those things.
That's a great question. And I'll sort of reword it a little bit and say, especially to our educators, how do we get more openly LGBT people to want to be in the education field? Any thoughts on how to make it a more attractive space or safe space?
I would say in Beaverton we have an LGBTQ affinity group where staff who identify as queer, whether or not they're out, we meet roughly once every 6 weeks, and it is so awesome to be around a group of your peers and say like, oh my gosh, this happened in class, and peers who are struggling to come out and to kind of be with on that journey. So I think having whatever your organization is, just having a place where queer folks can go and be with each other and kind of bounce things off each other, I think that's huge for me. So
I agree with that. I think what also helps in your HR efforts is to, like, in your benefits section, have an explicit explanation of benefits for same-gender couples or a section for transgender healthcare. I think that things like that are signals, right? I think of, the rainbow can be kind of put anywhere, but some people just use it as window dressing, but I think that it also sends, I'm not saying that the page has to have the rainbow on it, but when you take, but you could, it's things like that, but I think that by having some of that just explicitly stated there really helps. And also training your HR people to answer those questions, it just makes it a more welcoming environment for people that are considering working, because sometimes they'll apply, and if they're like, hey, so what, does my spouse get benefits? And state law, yeah, but the person should be able to say, yes, they do, instead of, I'm not sure, let me look. That signals that y'all don't have a lot of folks like me, or you haven't considered folks like me. And it's a competitive market. That's someone who tries to hire teachers.
I would also say, just real quickly, on like a grassroots level, I would, if you're working to build this more like culture and community and less like visibility policy pushing, blah blah blah, make a Facebook group. Like if you're a straight person trying to do this, I would be very cautious on how you do that. But for example, I'm in the College Democrats and I'm involved in College Democrats of America, and there's a lot of us that are very out, and so we literally have a group chat called CD Gays, as a CDA but CD Gays, and that's where we just get to like talk and send memes to each other and just create this culture and community, and that is kind of an environment that we invite people in all the time. And so if that's something you're able to do within that, I would say like the grassroots level is also really important in building a culture that also creates a domino effect to have these things in other communities.
And on those, do you feel like you have enough security that you're not opening up for a lot of negative comments? Because that's what the scare is with that. So
Yeah, for me, it's a group of us, and so if you come for one of us, you're going to come for all 15 of us in this group chat. And they're all from different states, they all have different networks and legislators who back them. So if you come for me, you're coming for Representative Sinema in Arizona. So, Senator, there we go, I'm so sorry.
You made me think of something that I wanted to mention really quickly. If any of you have heard of Grow Your Own programs in Oregon, basically Grow Your Own programs, the idea is we need more teachers of color because the research is really clear that students of color perform much better, even if they only see one teacher of color throughout their academic career. It also benefits all students socially to have leaders of color in schools. I'm wondering now if these Grow Your Own programs that are designed to recruit and retain teachers of color should be expanded to also consider LGBT people. So that's one random thought. Final question, we're going in the back and we've got
I was going to try and tip off Lindsay. Contracts. Protection. Hey,
Talk
the
about
contract. Bargain
Thank you, OEA.
I should really, Elizabeth Nall is one of my OEA people. Contracts, holy cow, get your associations, your labor organizations to bargain protections into your contracts for your queer folks, period. Because then it's in there. Done. Thanks.
The gentleman that is sitting next to me represents
We're going to give the final word to our treasurer, Stonewall Treasurer.
Hi, I'm Bill Hers, and I guess I came out as gay when I was about 38, so I'll come out as old. But I have 97-year-old parents, so that's hard too. And having, after my residency in psychiatry, coming over to Bowman, and wanting to actually discover that I liked working best in small rural community mental health centers, anything under the 12 employees. It's been an interesting time. From my own standpoint of support, there was a group called the Association of Gay Lesbian Psychiatrists, and about late 1980s I managed to walk into a room in New York where there were 300 of them and decided that I was on the right planet after all, which helped. But some things over the years, one of the early things during the AIDS epidemic was actually the Oregon Public Health Division, which had federal funds somehow during the Reagan administration to fund AIDS support groups and actually hold conferences around the states where we got all people from all these rural counties and contact output to youth, and everything was part of that too. So there was this incredible world network that helped. It was also helped by an organization that I don't know if other people have heard of, called the Rural Organizing Project, which has been around for years and was one of these things that if we had they formed human rights coalitions in almost every little county in the state. So if somebody had a discrimination incident that occurred in Christmas Valley, within 8 hours it was known all over the state, and there was some support being brought in. One of the other, sorry, we do gotta wrap up. Okay, I'm sorry. PFLAG, 30 years, and that has been amazing in what they keep doing. 1993 we did, there was a person named Scott Thiemann who got a grant from the Fred Meyer Foundation to go around, because it had teaching experience, and he just walked into the principal's office and say, hi, and he looked like he was basically a gay football player. And he'd say, can I talk to your superintendent about the needs of gay and lesbian youth in your school? And he did this all over. And we ended up doing in 1993 a conference on the needs of gay and lesbian youth in Bend. I'll tell you that story separately some other time. It was fascinating what happened. Thank you.
All right, one final round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much.